Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our discussion on risks your company faces with your electronics and how you can establish an electronics recycling program within your organization. Before we begin, let's cover a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation will take approximately 20 minutes. At the conclusion of this, we will have 10 minutes set aside for any questions. Please note you can send in your questions via WebEx at any time during the presentation. Today's discussion will be available on demand for those of you wanting to use it as a reference, and you will also be sent a link at the conclusion of the webinar. Now, let's meet our presenters. Pete Keller is the Vice President of Recycling and Sustainability at Republic Services. He is responsible for defining and implementing the strategic direction of the sustainability platform. Pete has an extensive background in operations and compliance with over 25 years of environmental services experience, having served in prior roles as region engineer and area president. Also presenting with Pete is Brett Beitzel, the Director of Product Development. Brett oversees research, development, and implementation of new products at Republic Services to help meet customers' growing waste, recycling, and diversion needs. He has over 10 years of experience working in both B2B and B2C customer research and product development. Now I will turn it over to our first presenter, Brett, to lead the discussion.
Thanks, Allie. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. At this point, you've probably seen quite a bit about electronics recycling, electronics waste, and that's why you're here. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page of the different types of electronics waste. We define it as 3 different types. There are video display devices, which are TVs, monitors, likely what you're watching us on today. There's also high grade, which are things that store a lot of data. Think towers, laptops, things of that nature. And then there's low grade. Low grade devices is basically anything with a cord. A lot of people think mice, keyboards, but you can even go as far as thinking blenders, right? They're still an electronic device. We're going to talk about a couple things today and really focus in on 2 areas. Those 2 areas are environmental protection and how we dispose of electronic devices, and also data protection. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on data protection because there may be some surprising facts and figures that you didn't know about, and maybe some surprising things that actually store data that you didn't know before. One really interesting fact before I turn it over to Pete to talk a little bit more about the environment is that every million cell phones, so the cell phone that we carry around in our pockets on a daily basis, right? Every million of those, 35,000 pounds of copper, 772 pounds of silver, 75 pounds of gold, and 33 pounds of palladium can be extracted from those. That's not the only part. That's the valuable part. There's also a part that Pete's going to tell you a little bit more about that really is the dangerous part. Worldwide, we're estimated to have about 45.7 million tons of electronics waste, and that's just in 2016. In the US, it's a little bit smaller number, around 8 million tons. And that's, again, just in 2016. It's the fastest growing waste stream in the world, and we want to make sure that you have the right information to be able to protect yourselves and protect your business when you're disposing of these items. So Pete, I'm going to have you talk about the environmental aspect of this.
Thanks, Brett. Just a little bit more about some of the environmental protection issues in and around electronic waste. You know, Brett had mentioned the 3 categories of electronic waste. Electronic waste is really complex, and that's one of the reasons that it's so challenging to manage. There is no federal regulatory framework, state-by-state regulations fragmented. There are certain segments of electronic waste that can be reused, resold. Certainly if you have a computer or some peripheral that still works, it's pretty common for those products to be resold in the markets directly. It's also common to recover certain pieces or certain components of electronic waste. One of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest risks is the hazardous component of electronic waste. So think lead, mercury, cadmium, beryllium. There's also some fire retardant components in the plastic casing that can be hazardous. Brett had mentioned a little bit about worldwide generation of electronic waste. The majority of that electronic waste today ends up in developing countries. So think China, think India, think Africa. Most often in these countries, they don't have the type of environmental regulation that we're all used to. The recovery is really focused on that valuable portion of the electronic waste as opposed to managing the entire product or component responsibly. So it's often, we often see folks chasing copper or fractions of the precious and semi-precious metals either through open burning, so just rendering metals off of boards and chips, or recovering copper wire by simply burning the insulation off the wires. The end result of that is environmental degradation at an alarming rate. I think contamination of groundwater, contamination of the land, worker safety. You know, we often see the health of the workers in these environments be poor. And then think of wildlife. Now, it's really important as you think about the management of the electronic waste that your organization is producing. The biggest implications, obviously, company reputation and environmental liability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. So I'm going to turn back over to Brett to talk a little bit about data protection.
Thanks, Pete. So we're talking about a very somber topic when you talk about export of products. I want to talk about how it directly impacts you and your business as well. So data protection is really where this starts to come into play. And first we're going to talk about the items that are included that maybe you've thought about before and some maybe that you haven't. Some of the items that you're used to or that you would think of that have a lot of data: computers, hard drives, laptops, tablets, iPads, cell phones. No surprise there. But even when wiping the hard drives on these pieces of hardware, sensitive data is still able to be found. That's, of course, unless it's done the right way. Pete will talk to you a little bit more later about how to make sure it's done the right way. But if you don't, right, and if you think that you can do it yourself or you're not doing it through a normal process, we have a fun fact for you. MIT recovered 92.4% of sensitive information across 158 used hard drives. That's a ridiculous quantity of information that you can extract. So if you don't handle those hard drives and the devices that we expect properly, data can be extracted from them. Now there's other items that I want to make sure that you know about, right? Because we all know about hard drives. We don't necessarily think about printers, copiers, fax machines, what we like to call multifunctional devices. All of those have mini storage. They all have small hard drives or small memory or small storage that's actually containing images or other data that's very easy to extract. Printers are a great example of this, so are copiers. If you think about a copier and what you put through there, you put employee records in a copier. You put company finances through a copier. You put social security numbers and all sorts of health benefits through copiers that you provide to employees. All that memory is stored for a period of time. So it's really, it's a scary endeavor to think that you can just throw away all these multifunctional devices as well. So don't just think about hard drives, think about multifunctional devices, and make sure that you're protecting all of it. The current state within organizations, when we talk to some IT professionals and other folks out there, when they talk about how they want these devices protected, we found out that, first of all, 80% of corporate computers contain sensitive data. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. What is a surprise is that 34% of IT personnel don't have a secure process to get rid of this data. They don't have a process in place at all. I hope that's none of you today, but if it is, then it's something that you're going to want to focus on. 59% of IT professionals agree that their organizations don't invest enough in IT security, whether that's traditional security as we think about it in cloud computing, or whether it's the disposal, like we're talking about today, of electronics devices. It is a top priority for IT professionals to make sure that they are really clamping down on security, and this is one of the ways that you can do that. So let's talk about the data destruction a little bit more specifically. We want to talk about data breach. According to the Office of Management and Budget, our government defines a security data breach as a compromise of the security, confidentiality, or integrity of data. Right? Really think of this as just stealing the data off of that device and being able to extract it somewhere else. So this is a really potentially highly impactful issue that could occur for your business. The average cost of a data breach is from $3.79 million last year to $4 million in 2016. In the US, the average per capita cost of a data breach is $221. So think about the sheer population number when you think per capita, and that's $221 a person. 48% of all those breaches in the US were caused by malicious or criminal attacks. So when we're thinking about data breach, a lot of us think cloud computing, we think massive storage stacks, we think hackers. Hackers are not only hackers who are going after that data in the cloud, now they're attacking it in dumpsters, they're attacking it in landfills, and they're attacking it in other places where you don't want this material to be. So you need to make sure that it's being secured. Items stored or thrown away are still highly susceptible to data theft. And it's relatively simple for somebody to go in and extract all this data. It takes about 12 hours to download 10,000 documents using forensic software programs. So you can think about how much that can actively pull off of your computer of all of that data that you have stored there. Now that we've talked a little bit about data breach and data security, what we want to talk about is what the right solution is for you to go out and figure out how to take care of these devices. Pete's going to come back up now and talk to us a little bit about how to select a partner in this space that can really make sure that you're truly protected. Pete?
Thanks, Brett. So the importance of selecting a good partner. Brett touched on a number of issues in and around data security and the importance of data security. I think most folks in the audience are familiar or have read stories of large U.S. corporations paying significant fines over the course of the last several years relative to inappropriate management of electronic materials, illegal dumping of hazardous substances, or not managing sensitive data in appropriate ways. So obviously there are economic ramifications of not managing data and or materials appropriately. So the importance of partner selection and who you ultimately hire to manage these streams. 7 important areas to focus on when selecting a partner. Obviously, you want a company that has a solid history of not only operations, but good environmental compliance. A company that has infrastructure, that has real assets, not just rented warehouse space and leased processing equipment. A company that has true capacity and capabilities in multiple marketplaces, sophisticated electronics dismantling, shredding, recovery systems. Large quantities of material is important. Some of these facilities are very small in nature, and the ability to process large quantities of material certainly can give you comfort that you have a good, solid partner. Customization of services. If you have locations in various geographies, you may find yourself in different regulatory environments that require different solutions, and the ability to customize and tailor those end-of-life services would be an important piece of selecting a good partner. Third-party validation is also something that's very, very important. The most common validations that exist in the space, E-Stewards and R2. ISO 14001 is also a certification that is gaining traction. Downstream vendor relationships, so think of end markets. What is ultimately happening to the materials that are either being resold, recovered, recycled, or disposed of? Making sure that all of those materials end up in appropriate end markets is very important. And then lastly, data security. Making sure that data is being wiped to the highest standards. There are generally accepted standards out there. Department of Defense, National Institute of Standards and Technology are two of the most commonly referenced. Also, Brett had mentioned punching a device isn't always enough. So when data security is important, making sure that those drives and other devices that store data are shredded. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Brett to tell us some stories about customers.
Thanks, Pete. So I want to make sure that everybody out there today understands that whether you're a small business, whether you're a large business, whether you're Fortune 500, Inc. 5000, right? All companies, all industries, all sizes truly have some level of need for electronics recycling. Let's start by talking about large volume generators. Think railroads, manufacturers, retail chains, folks who have a lot of technology flowing back and forth. This is for the big companies out there. If you have large quantities that are consolidated in single areas, there's great services that are pallet, pack up and pick up services where you just palletize the material, put everything together, and then they'll come and take that material and take it off to somewhere to process for you. There's also even full service opportunities that are white glove solutions where you don't even have to touch it. They'll have people who come out and take care of it for you. It's great for those folks who have large amounts of material in one space. But let's also remember the small quantity generators or the small volume generators. Even if you're a large business, if you're a heavily distributed business, think retail locations for major companies or even retail franchises or small businesses. Sometimes the best solution for you is something that's simple and can still be safe, and that is USPS or FedEx or UPS shipment. And it'll go back to that facility. You can track it the entire way, and then they'll track the processing and disposal at the end. So you can still kind of round out that process, whether you're a small business or a large business. There are solutions for you. So make sure that you're looking for the right solutions. Again, I want to touch on the fact that no matter what size you are as an organization, you have data containing devices. We have cell phones, we have cash registers, we have printers. It's becoming a more digital age, and the waste stream, or just electronics in general, are growing at almost a 10% clip year over year. Think about how many more devices we have now than we've ever had in the past. And that's more and more true and more prevalent in business. With that, I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions. So please let us know any questions that you have. Anything that we didn't cover today, we're happy to cover. Thanks again.